A simple woman was humiliated on her first day at work, unaware she was the new CEO. The morning air in Chicago held a sharp chill as Clara stood before the towering glass headquarters of a company she would soon lead, though no one knew it yet. The building shimmered in the pale sun, a symbol of wealth and ambition. Clara, dressed in a carefully pressed second-hand suit, looked nothing like a CEO. Her canvas tote, worn from years of use, hung from her shoulder as she stepped inside, just another face in the crowd. Before we move further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for heartwarming stories like this. Few knew that behind her quiet smile was a woman sent to test the heart of the company from the inside. What began as a simple first day would soon unravel into a reckoning of culture, character, and hidden power. Inside, the lobby pulsed with movement. Phones rang. Heels clacked. No one looked up. Clara approached the front desk. "Name?" The receptionist asked, fingers already typing. "Clara," she replied, calm and composed. "Department." A brief pause. "I'm here to observe operations today." The woman barely reacted. "You'll want HR downstairs. They handle new hires." "I've spoken to them," Clara said softly. The woman gestured vaguely down the hall. "Just wait outside the conference room. Someone might come for you." And so she did, silently, unseen, and underestimated. Clara thanked her, though the words stuck in her throat. She stepped into the corridor, where laughter drifted from nearby offices. Two employees walked past her, glanced at her shoes, and exchanged a smirk. Clara caught it. She always did. She didn't need words to recognize disdain. The hallway stretched ahead like a test of endurance. Clara passed rows of gleaming plaques that displayed names she'd memorized in her research: executives, division heads, team leads. This was a place built on legacy and loud titles, yet here she was, invisible. As she neared the conference room, a man in a sleek suit stepped out with a stack of papers. He paused briefly, scanning her from head to toe, then looked over her shoulder. "You lost?" he asked, not unkindly, but not kindly either. "No, I'm just waiting to be let in," she answered. He nodded vaguely, already walking away. "They're usually late." Clara stood in the hallway as if it were a threshold between two worlds, the one she came from and the one that didn't yet recognize her. She glanced at the glass door to the room she wasn't invited into. Inside, men and women in tailored suits sipped coffee, pointing at charts and laughing at inside jokes. Through the frosted section of the glass, she could barely make out their faces, but their energy was unmistakable, confident, territorial, and impenetrable. A few minutes passed. A group walked by and slowed just enough to glance at her. "Interns are starting early these days," someone muttered. Another chuckled. "She looks like she wandered in from reception." Clara lowered her eyes, a storm brewing behind them. Not of anger, but clarity. She stood straighter, not because she needed their validation, but because she refused to let them take her dignity. Still, the sting lingered. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small notebook, and began jotting down thoughts. Observations. Behaviors. Words. Names. A few more people walked past. None of them stopped to greet her. Not one asked if she needed anything. And so she waited, outside a room filled with people who believed they already knew her place. The irony curled like smoke in her mind, but she said nothing. There would be time for that later. For now, she remained silent, patient, and watching. Clara stepped in quietly, clutching her mug with both hands as if to anchor herself. Her smile was soft, open, hopeful. She approached the counter where a few employees gathered around the coffee pot, laughing over some office anecdote. "Morning," she said gently. One of the women, perched confidently on the counter edge, glanced over. Her expression didn't change. She gave a half-hearted nod, then turned back to her conversation. The man next to her barely acknowledged Clara before continuing a story about the chaotic intern who spilled latte over some reports last week. Clara stood silently, pouring coffee, listening without meaning to. Her shoulders squared subtly. She wasn't sure what she expected, politeness, perhaps. Just the courtesy of a word or a question. Instead, she received silence and sideways glances, the kind meant to be seen but not addressed. As she stirred in sugar, voices dropped behind her. "Who is she, anyway?" someone whispered. "New admin. Maybe," a woman replied with a shrug. "Nah," came a sharper voice. "HR said we had someone coming in from a special background. You know. One of those charity hires." They laughed. "Looks it. Did you see those shoes? God, if I showed up in those, I'd be sent home. Maybe she's somebody's cousin. That happens all the time." Clara didn't turn around. She didn't need to see their faces. The words were enough, stinging, careless, loud enough to hear, quiet enough to deny. She took her mug and sat at a table near the window, alone. The chair squeaked slightly as she settled in. Her eyes remained calm, but something flickered beneath the surface. A spark, not of anger, but understanding. They were so used to their bubble, they couldn't see past their own reflection. She sipped her coffee. It was bitter, slightly burnt, just like the moment. She looked out the window, watched as a delivery truck backed into the loading bay. Anything to shift her focus. Yet the voices continued. They weren't done with her. I bet she'll be gone in a week. She doesn't have the face for this place. What do you mean? She doesn't look like someone who knows what she's doing. I mean, come on. Laughter followed. Clara closed her eyes for just a second. In that breath, she remembered harder days, places where silence was survival and judgment came dressed as smiles. This wasn't new, but it still hurt. She didn't pretend it didn't. She opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the window pane. Not the glass office doors or the polished walls, just that quiet mirror of herself, fragile yet solid. Her fingers curled gently around the mug, knuckles tightening just enough to feel the tension without showing it. She would remember this moment. Every word, every face. She took out her notebook from her tote bag and, without lifting her head, began writing. A simple line, a name, an observation. She made it look like she was doodling. No one paid her any attention now. Eventually, the break room emptied. They left behind empty cups, open gossip, and assumptions flung like confetti. Clara remained seated, letting the silence settle. The bitterness of their words still lingered in the air, but so did her quiet defiance. Her heart ached, yes, but her will sharpened. They saw a stranger with secondhand shoes. They didn't see the woman who would change everything. Not yet, but they would. The conference room buzzed with low chatter as employees trickled in, clutching laptops and half-empty coffee cups. Clara entered quietly, taking a seat at the far end of the long table. No one acknowledged her presence, save for a brief glance from a junior associate who looked away just as quickly. The manager, a man named Halden, stood near the whiteboard with an air of casual arrogance. He didn't introduce Clara, nor did he seem inclined to. The meeting began with routine updates, sales figures, project timelines, client feedback. Clara listened intently, her pen gliding across her notepad as she absorbed every word. It was her first glimpse into how the company operated behind closed doors. Then came the moment. Halden posed a problem to the group. Productivity across departments was down. He asked for ideas. A few suggestions trickled in, safe and predictable. Clara hesitated only a second before clearing her throat. What if we streamline client intake by integrating automated scheduling, she said, her voice steady but soft. It could reduce back-and-forth emails and free up time for more strategic work. She was halfway through explaining when Halden raised a hand. Thanks, he said, voice laced with mock gratitude. But let's leave the big ideas to the experienced ones, shall we? The room chuckled. Clara felt her breath catch but forced a polite nod. She looked down, scribbled something in her notebook, though not her idea. Just a word, noted. Halden moved on without another glance in her direction. Clara kept her posture upright, face calm, but her stomach churned. The dismissal stung, not because she wasn't heard, but because she was. The meeting continued. Minutes later, as if struck by a flash of brilliance, Halden clapped his hands together. Actually, he said, here's a thought. What if we automate the scheduling process to improve efficiency? The same idea. Her idea. This time, the room responded differently. Nods of approval, a few impressed murmurs. A woman across the table typed something quickly, likely noting it as an action point. No one remembered the source. No one cared. Clara watched it unfold with remarkable stillness. She didn't interrupt, didn't correct. She simply observed. Her expression remained composed, but inside, her thoughts burned sharp and clear. She wasn't angry yet. This wasn't just about credit. It was about culture, power, patterns. She watched how Halden's words were received with ease, while hers were swatted away without consideration. The room had decided who mattered before anyone spoke. She didn't retaliate, not with words, but she took in every reaction. The way colleagues nodded eagerly at Halden's version of her proposal, the absence of even a glance in her direction. It was a performance, and they were all playing their roles. She turned another page in her notebook and began writing again. Not the idea, it had already been stolen. She was writing something else now. A list, not of tasks, but of truths. Halden's name was at the top. As the meeting wrapped, Clara gathered her things without a word. No one noticed. No one thanked her for attending. But she wasn't there to be seen, not yet. The real meeting, for Clara, had only just begun. Clara slipped into the restroom with quiet urgency, the door clicking shut behind her like a seal over her frayed composure. The air inside was cool and still, untouched by the noise and judgment she had left behind. For a moment, she stood motionless, breathing in the silence as if it might steady the turbulence within. She moved slowly to the sink, placed her palms on the counter, and stared into the mirror. The reflection that greeted her felt like someone else. Her shoulders were stiff, her posture too upright, like a fortress built against ridicule. The fluorescent light revealed more than she liked. The creases beneath her eyes, the shadow of exhaustion, the unspoken ache of restraint. With a soft sigh, she removed her glasses, setting them beside the sink. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached up and wiped at the corners of her eyes. No tears had fallen, but they had gathered, threatening to betray her. She caught them before they could. Just one more day of this, she whispered to herself. Her voice was low, steady. They'll know tomorrow. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a promise. It was a reminder, one spoken only to herself. She leaned closer to the mirror, as though searching for the version of her that others couldn't see. The one she had trained, sharpened, tested in markets half a world away. The one who had once stood on a global stage delivering keynote addresses in 3 languages. The one who had transformed a struggling startup into a leading tech empire across Asia. That woman lived beneath this humble frame, beneath the thrifted suit and unpolished shoes. But Clara had tucked her away for a reason. She hadn't come here to be worshipped. She came to watch. And what she saw unnerved her more than she had expected. The arrogance. The exclusion. The subtle cruelty disguised as corporate culture. No handbook could capture the rot she'd observed in the past 24 hours. No welcome email could warn her about the hierarchy that treated kindness as weakness and new faces as unworthy. She opened her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. Inside were notes she had scribbled since her arrival, names, impressions, brief observations. There were no accusations, just truths, unfiltered, raw. She had asked the board to trust her method. Let her arrive without fanfare. Let her listen, unseen, untouched by power's usual distortion. At first, it had sounded idealistic, maybe even foolish. But now she knew exactly why it had to be this way. A knock echoed lightly against the restroom door. Someone else was entering. Clara tucked her journal away, rinsed her hands, and dabbed her face dry with a paper towel. She slipped her glasses back on, her expression calm once again. But something had shifted. She no longer stood there as someone enduring the day. She stood as someone ready to complete what she started. One more day? That was all it would take. She adjusted her blazer and exited the restroom, her silence carrying more weight than words. The senior board members had gathered early, all with folders marked confidential in crisp black lettering. At the head of the table sat Chairman Alden Voss, his hands steepled under his chin. His silver hair caught the morning light, but his eyes were sharp, scanning each page with the precision of a man who knew every move before it happened. The press release is ready, murmured Judith, the company's head of communications. We'll publish exactly 1 hour after the internal announcement. Voss gave a slow nod. And the staff has no clue? Not a whisper, said another board member. They still think she's part of some diversity hiring initiative. Poor intern, some of them call her. The room chuckled, but Voss did not. He leaned forward. Let's be clear, he said. Clara Evans is not here to check boxes. She's here because she built a billion-dollar company from scratch. She's here because she understands people, culture, and vision better than any of us. Still, not all faces at the table were convinced. She's talented, came a cautious voice from the far end. But this approach, walking in anonymously, letting herself be disrespected, is that really necessary? Voss turned toward the speaker. It was her choice. She asked for it. Said she wanted to meet the company's true self before it had time to dress up. There was a pause, heavy with silent calculation. She's testing us, in a way, he added, almost thoughtfully. Or rather, she's testing them. The managers, the culture, the power structures. What kind of leader would she be if she based her decisions on polished reports and staged smiles? Another director spoke, softer this time. She's been watching everything. Exactly, Voss said, and taking notes. A hum of agreement passed through the room. Slowly, minds shifted from skepticism to intrigue. They knew Clara's resume. They had seen her turn chaos into order, loss into profit. But what she was doing now, this quiet infiltration, wasn't just bold. It was revolutionary. Across the table, Judith clicked open her tablet. We've drafted the internal memo, finalized the welcome speech. We're ready for the transition. And Clara? Voss asked. She's still among them, someone replied. Still dressed in plain clothes, still being underestimated. Voss allowed himself the faintest smile. Good. For a moment, silence returned to the boardroom. The kind of silence that came before change. On the table before them lay everything, the signed offer letter, the updated leadership chart, the private calendar block for the internal reveal. Each piece of paper carried weight, but none more than the realization that everything was about to shift. Perceptions, power, position. She'll join us at 2, Voss finally said, closing his folder. Let's make sure the room is ready. The board nodded in agreement. They rose one by one, the scraping of chairs blending with the unspoken anticipation pulsing beneath the surface. Outside, the office carried on in blissful ignorance. Inside, the final countdown had already begun. At exactly 2 o'clock, the company's internal messaging system sent a single-line notice across every screen. All staff, please report to the boardroom immediately for an important announcement. The hallways buzzed with curiosity. Meetings were paused, calls dropped, and coffee cups abandoned. Employees filed toward the boardroom with a mix of impatience and intrigue. Some whispered theories, new restructuring, a merger, maybe even layoffs. Few, if any, noticed Clara quietly moving with the crowd, her expression unreadable, her pace steady. As people filtered into the room, the atmosphere thickened. Conversations echoed and laughter lingered, but as soon as Clara entered, a few faces turned sour. She stood near the back, where no one would expect her to speak. A young associate glanced her way with a look that barely concealed annoyance. A woman near the front nudged her colleague and muttered, "She still thinks she's supposed to be here?" The manager who had silenced Clara in the earlier meeting took a seat near the head of the table, shoulders relaxed, smile smug. He didn't give her a second glance. Moments later, the door closed behind the last person. The chatter died down when Chairman Voss stood and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for joining us on such short notice," he began, his voice calm but firm. "We've reached a significant turning point in our journey, and today, we welcome a new chapter." A hush settled. People leaned forward slightly, anticipating the name of a seasoned executive, perhaps someone with years inside the company. All eyes were on Voss. "It is my honor," he continued, "to introduce to you our new Chief Executive Officer." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Please welcome Clara Evans." The silence cracked. A gasp escaped from somewhere near the center of the room. Heads whipped toward the back. Mouths parted, eyes widened. Clara stepped forward, her simple attire unchanged, but now it no longer diminished her, it defined her. The manager who had dismissed her earlier went stiff. His lips parted, searching for something to say, but no words came. Others who had whispered, mocked, or ignored her suddenly seemed frozen in place. Clara walked to the front, unhurried and poised. Her presence filled the space with quiet authority. When she turned to face them, she didn't wear a smirk or seek revenge with her eyes. Instead, she offered a composed, unwavering smile. "Some of you may not remember me," she began, her voice steady. "Others have spoken about me without ever asking my name. That's all right." The room remained still. When I arrived, I chose not to lead with my title. I chose not to announce myself because I wanted to see something first, something beyond resumes, performance reviews, or formal greetings. I wanted to understand who you are when no one's watching. A few people lowered their gazes. I've spent the last 20 years building teams across countries, rescuing companies on the edge of collapse. But none of that matters if a workplace forgets how to treat people with basic decency. She paused, letting her words land. I believe leadership is not about how loudly you speak, but how deeply you listen. It's not about command, it's about character. Clara looked out across the room, meeting the eyes of those who had doubted her. Today marks a change, not just in leadership, but in how we value one another. There was nothing more to prove. Not today, not anymore. The boardroom had long since emptied, but the echoes of Clara's revelation lingered in the hallways like a shifting wind. Word spread fast. By the time the afternoon sun began to tilt across the lobby floor, the entire company was humming with uneasy energy. Some employees hovered near her office door, awkward smiles on their faces, hearts pounding behind their rehearsed apologies. Clara accepted each one with grace, not because she had to, but because she understood the weight of unlearning. Not everyone was cruel. Some had simply followed the current without realizing where it was headed. Others kept their distance, unable to face the woman they had dismissed. They passed her in the hallway with lowered eyes, their footsteps quick, their greetings clipped or absent. Clara didn't chase them. She didn't need their remorse. Her focus was forward. The days that followed were brisk and deliberate. She moved through departments not as a figurehead, but as a leader with purpose. Meetings were no longer one-sided performances. Clara asked questions no one had dared to ask before. She studied numbers, listened to stories, and quietly began pulling weeds where no one had thought to look. The man who had silenced her in the team meeting was called into her office. Their conversation was brief. She reminded him of the idea he'd claimed and the moment he'd stolen. He didn't argue, he only nodded, pale and small, as she slid a formal letter across the desk. His departure was swift. But Clara didn't lead with punishment alone. She remembered the intern who had held the door open for her without question. The analyst who had offered a seat when others looked away. The woman from payroll who had smiled and asked if she was settling in. These gestures had seemed small, unnoticed in a company chasing scale and success, but Clara saw them clearly now. Acts of quiet integrity. She promoted them, not as tokens, but as builders. Foundations for the new culture she was shaping. The office atmosphere began to shift. Meetings became more inclusive. Ideas were welcomed from all corners. Slowly, the walls between departments thinned. Trust was no longer earned by title, but by contribution. Clara didn't broadcast these changes. She let the work speak. Let the silence of her authority do what loud declarations never could. People started to talk differently this time. Not about her clothes, or where she sat in the break room, but about how she made decisions, how she listened without interrupting, how she saw what others didn't. By the end of the week, her new office, once belonging to men who measured leadership by volume, had become a place of measured strength. She stood by the tall window, dressed now in a tailored suit that reflected both elegance and ease. In one hand, she held a cup of tea. In the other, nothing at all. She didn't need to carry power. She had become it. Outside, the skyline shimmered, caught in the fading light. The city pulsed, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding in one of its highest towers. And as Clara watched the world below, a single thought anchored her. Respect should never depend on appearance. Power is silent, but never invisible. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share this video. Thank you.